Hi, this is Terry with Colorado Celtic Creations. I'm going to show all you Irish dance dressmakers how to construct a skirt. So first, you're going to need the pieces of the frame, which would be the front piece and the two pieces in the back. They'll be mirror images of each other. If you need help getting to this point and how to construct the frame, I can do that in a separate video. You guys can just ask. The other things you're going to want are obviously your two back skirt pieces and your front skirt piece. Now, roughly, and I can show you the construction, but you have the front frame is going to be a piece that looks like this, and you're going to have these two fold over into pleats. So you should have designed this and your skirt piece that they are the same at the top and these side edges, that they just line up just like that. So if you look at the back, and I cover my frame pieces in the same material that I use as the underskirt of my fabric. So if you see these line up exactly, move these skirts out of the way. And so to start with, you're just going to baste these at the very top, higher than would be attaching the skirt so it doesn't show. You're going to baste these pieces together along the top edge. And I'll show you that in a minute. We'll do that with both the back and the side skirt. So again, here's a side skirt. We want to find the piece that is going to match that and put that on here. So before I get these tucked away, I'm going to give you a little closer look at what I do with these. You can see you want on the frame, you want it finished all the way around the edge. I just serge it. I get a thread in the same color as the satin I'm using. I also tend to do a couple long stitches down the center of it. I just find it adds just a little extra structure. Just gives me a little bit more. I do that on the front as well. Again, I have boning in mine and a couple layers of violin on this and some boning on the sides. Not everybody uses that. But I just find that gives me a much more rigid skirt and it's able to hold my designs better. So we'll show you just a bit about lining this up. Again, we're going to line up those creases. We're going to line up this line right there. Again, the top edges on these should be lining up directly. If you're using the Gunarinka pattern, just be aware that on some of the versions, the seam allowance isn't the same at the top on both. So just pay attention that it is marked on the pattern, but you want these top edges to be the same on both your frame and your skirt. Okay, we've got, again, the pleat is left in this one. So I'm going to line up ends, and I've got a place where that pleat lives. Again, a bit of a preference thing on the pleats. Some dressmakers make heavy use of them, some not at all. I kind of added them more recently when I decided to start carrying the embroidery further down on the skirt. Again, it gives me a little more flexibility in case it doesn't quite line up. So you can see I have I mark just a basting line of where I expect my bodice to connect to this after I've done a fitting. So I always want to baste above that line. I have that on all of my pieces, so I'll eventually pull that out. The basting line up here that's above, you don't need to pull out. You can stitch it. I just tend to use a basting stitch just to make sure we hold it in place. Okay, now that you've got your skirts basted onto your frames, and you'll notice I still have some pins on this side because I'm going to keep that unattached from the frame until I do my final fitting. Now, that doesn't affect our ability to put the whole skirt together. So let's just take one side of this. So, question is, how do these work? So what you want to do is find the two sides that match when the right sides are together. So in this case, it's going to be, your folded pleat is going to be the same on both sides. Again, it's important when you're designing your frame before you cover it and satin it and whatever. It's once you get your frame cut out or even on paper, make sure that this part of the pleat, from the fold over to the flat part, is the same as the other side. It's not hugely important that the length is the same, but where that pleat hits and the angle of that is important that that's the same, and you'll see why. Now, regular pins don't like to go through this many layers of things. To be honest, neither do regular machines, but I have sewed plenty of these on a really basic Brother sewing machine. Your needle is very important. Make sure you get a heavy denim needle. If you're gonna try, some of you may even need that to go through the frame at the top when you're putting this on, but certainly when you're going through multiple layers, you need to get a really heavy needle. It'll make a huge difference. Some machines just kind of refuse, but like I said, I've got a real basic Brother and I haven't had, it gets through most things. All right, so I'm just going to quickly pin those together. And what you want to do is we're going to run a stitch all the way around here. But let me show you really quickly how that's going to work once we're done, because I always want to check it first. So when you fold that back together, those folds match up. That line should be the same. And then you have your front skirt with your kick pleat and your back skirt. And then once this is on the dancer, you'll see that back skirt, and I use a much more flexible fabric in the back out after I get past the pleat, but that's going to move around the dancer and you're going to have your kick pleat. So it's really a matter of, again, making sure those are the same and the depth is the same from this side over, and you need to make that decision when you're first creating the pattern. Don't wait till this point and then try to correct it. That's going to get complicated. So we're just going to sew down this level. Once I know it's where I need to be and finish it, I tend to put some binding on it, just make some binding out of the satin that I'm using and finish that edge. Again, not important, just makes it look a little smoother inside. So I will, I'm going to pin and pin both sides and sew both sides. I'm not going to put the binding on yet, but then I'll be back. So a couple more things. You may notice I've got these kind of strange pins. These are Tpins, they're upholstery pins. I get thick ones of those. I tend to find those are kind of useful with your either pinning the skirt onto the bodice or trying to hold a couple thick layers together like this. Again, take some time to make sure you've got your frame really lined up. The frame is the most critical part in terms of lining it up and making sure that's even. If it's off or crooked, that part of the skirt isn't going to lay right, and you'll find you're ending up redoing it at some point again. So switch this. A couple more things, questions you may have. One is sometimes people put a tulle ruffle along here. All you do is create something. I generally make sure it's just a little shorter than what the dress will be. Take a long piece, ruffle it tightly, and sew it right on this outer edge. So it's going to be the unfinished, or the top of that netting will be between the frame and the skirt. And then you can sew that all along here, and then once it's there, if anything's hanging below, you just want to trim that so it's not showing beneath the skirt. If I don't have very heavy embroidery, I sometimes will do that to give more structure to the skirt. If you look, this particular design is solid embroidery almost from frame to frame, so I'm not going to add it on this particular skirt. You can also add it if you want on the back. I find that doesn't really add that much because typically the frame is so much higher than the skirt. This is actually a very tall skirt because of the dancer that I'm working with, but even so, you don't want a huge thick ruffle but you can put a little bit back here, but if you are going to add it, I'd say add it to the front. Again, that's preference. Some big name dressmakers use it, some The other thing I'm going to do, well, there's two things. One is, again, a preference, but the ADCRG that I work with a lot really doesn't like very floppy skirts. So what I tend to do, and she's had me do this mod on a couple of skirts for her dancers, is you can go back and sew right along this seam line up here. So you still have a kick pleat and it still separates some, but it's not separating quite as much and it doesn't flop as much. That is a personal preference, but I've tended to find they dance better if I bring it down. I generally start a couple inches below and just do it for a couple inches. So I'm still leaving a few inches, maybe at least half the skirt undone. If you do that, we need to make sure you really stabilize that stitch at both ends so that's not ripping back out. So I'm going to add that, and then I will show you the final piece of how you get this all together before you put it on your skirt. All right, and the last thing you do before, and again, you can bind on these edges, but the last thing you do before you're going to add this to your skirt, and it's not required, I just find you have a much better chance of getting your skirt to sit right if you do it now, is fold these in so the kick pleat is going toward the front, and you want to make sure that that angle is tight and not, you don't want it, if it goes down too much or up too much, your front skirt isn't going to lay correctly. So I find now, before you have any pressures on it, again, you can sort of pull that in. I want to do this above where the skirt, where the bodice is going to hit onto the skirt, but just go back and forth across this a few times. Again, that's going to be the hardest thing you try to get your needle through if you don't have an industrial machine. But get that into place, because when you're trying to do that with the bodice, because it's even worse when the bodice is going over that portion, it's too easy for that to slip and your angle to be a little off and your skirt won't lay right. So again, we're just folding that in, making sure that's sitting nice and flat. Just come up to this top. It's not warped or doing anything strange, and then we're just going to sew across. And just securing that kick pleat at the top. You'll just have a much better chance of that sitting right when you're done. Okay, so let's take a look at our final skirt, and as far as you can get really before you start working on adding the bodice to it. But if you will see on the sides, these fit together. You want to make sure when you're doing your pattern that the length of your back at that folding edge is the same as the front, so those are going to meet well. Again, if you may have designs or shapes on those. The other thing is where this is folded in. Now you'll notice if you've worked on some big name dressmakers, sometimes they have a pleat that comes down further and they will fold that up and out of the way and tack it together. I just happen to like to adjust my pattern enough that it comes up. And so you're not seeing it from the front when you're laying in the back. Now, the back obviously doesn't come evenly because it's got to be longer. It's got to go around the dancer. But again, it's going to come around and then meet in the center. If you have a thicker, like a more stiffened back frame, you'll find it's weird to try to get the dress to lay flat because that when you get it up here, then it's going to make a big kind of it's going to be more rounded in 3D. You can sort of just force it into a little bit of a, just pleat the frame a little bit as you get back here, and it'll help the dress lay down flat. Less so when you have some stiff embroidery along the hem. But again, those are going to go together like this in the back. I'll sew the back together once I've got it in place and fit on the bodice. Then I will sew the bottom of the back together up until where the zipper is, and then the zipper line will come. I'll probably take that about to the bottom of that green design. So happy to answer any questions if people want to DM me through the Irish dressmaking site, but hopefully that gives you an idea on exactly what you're looking at underneath here in a skirt. And I'm going to open this up so you can see on the inside. And again, whether you have some tulle here or some netting or some ruffled satin, this is what you're looking at initially. And then when that's together, so you can see the beauty of having a little bit more flexible frame in the back. But again, happy to show how to make the frames. If people need that, let me know.